Ed, that was fantastic. I'm so excited to introduce our next speaker. She's a true innovator, building strategic initiatives in security and emerging technologies at Amazon Web Services, as well as advising AWS's largest customers on making security a bottom line proposition. So over to Merritt Baer.
Thanks, Kelly, and hello, everyone. For those of you who have just joined and missed my earlier introductions, my name is Ed Bishop. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Tessian. Tessian is an AWS partner and part of the highly selective AWS APN Global Startup Program. So I'm especially pleased that we can host our next guest. I'm joined today by Merritt Baer, Principal Security Architect at Amazon Web Services. Merritt is a serious security heavyweight, and we are so lucky to have her join us. At AWS, she provides technical cloud security guidance to complex and highly regulated organizations like the Fortune 100 and advises the leadership of AWS's largest customers on how to drive security as a bottom line proposition, something we're also really passionate about. Beyond this, she's held roles in academia and 3 branches of government, so I'm really excited to hear her perspective on today's topics from all angles. So Merritt, to kick off, this feels like a bit of a turning point for security. Businesses aren't rushing back to the office and remote working isn't really going anywhere anytime soon. At this kind of key point in change, what pre-pandemic security principles do you think are important to hold on to? And what areas do we need to start rethinking?
Hi, Ed. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. And, I think that, to be honest, I don't see, I work at the enterprise level, so I'm not thinking about individual users and, the rise of targeted phishing campaigns, for example, or things that we're seeing at the end user level are just one piece of a broader puzzle that I look to solve. So I'm not thinking individual user level. And what I'm most concerned about when I'm talking to customers is really how do they get awareness, visibility, and the ability to execute security actions on their assets. And, it is my conviction that cloud gives you better visibility and better ability to execute on those insights. So I think to answer your question, I actually think that the principles that we had pre-pandemic are the same ones that we would apply now. And security is a process, so it's not sexy in some ways. Like there will never be a day that we say it's done. This is a human level, endeavor, and technology is human made, which always in my mind prompts the need to say, and that's why we need diverse development teams and security teams, recognizing that technology is human made. That being said, and come work for us or for Tessian. I mean, like this is my point where I give a little plug to folks who feel like they don't fit in the ecosystem to come, because we need folks who think they don't fit. But that being said, so the principles that we had before, I think, are still relevant. We're thinking through things like defense in depth, thinking through the life cycle of your security management, thinking through how to automate more, and also thinking through some of the kind of higher order things that you're able to do with cloud. So one of my favorite teams at AWS, for example, is the automated reasoning team. And they do, ARG, Automated Reasoning Group, is they do formal methods and higher level math applied to computer reasoning. So now that infrastructure is code, you can take something like a CloudFormation template or Terraform or whatever, you can deploy that, and you have, physical assets spun up, and now you can do security as code. So you're looking at your security groups, you're looking at network access control lists, and the traditional perimeter-based model is not where the security conversation ends these days. So Automated Reasoning Group actually applies that new reality to and allows you to use higher level math. So we use it internally to verify that our boot code is correct, to verify our crypto protocols, and we have it in external customer-facing products in, for example, Zelkova, which compares identity and access management (IAM) policies to see which one is more permissive, and in a tool called Tiros, which is now part of Amazon Inspector, that without a single packet going over your network can tell you about network reachability. So things like whether you have an internet-facing endpoint. So these are, there are ways that you can get at the kind of transcendental side of security as code. But I think, there's no replacement for some of the basic blocking and tackling that we'll always have to do.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. And also, yeah, I would like to echo Merritt's comments about if you feel like you care about security and want to get stuck in and don't feel like you're maybe welcome or feel like an outsider. Yeah, Amazon and Tessian would love to have you. So reach out to us. Yeah. So Merritt, picking up on that, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that actually cloud, viewing cloud through viewing security through cloud, if you've made that adoption, not too much has changed actually with the shift to kind of remote work. I guess it would be really interesting to hear your insights of I imagine many of the CISOs watching today maybe aren't using AWS, they're maybe not using other cloud providers, and they don't necessarily think of that as kind of security for them. They're thinking still on-prem models. Many enterprises are making the shift. And I'm really interested in, when does automation come in that part, kind of that timeline? So an enterprise comes to AWS and works with people like yourselves to start thinking about security. How comfortable are enterprises to start adopting things like automation? You mentioned things like security as code, something we're also really excited about at Tessian. But where does that come on the journey? Does it come straight away, or is there kind of a period of time where they need to get up to speed with AWS? It's a huge transformational shift for them, and maybe the automation comes slightly later. I'd just love to hear how you talk to your clients about that kind of when to bring in automation and things like security as code.
Yeah, so you are right in that, this tipping point, although it's really significant in our lives as humans, actually I think suits cloud in a lot of ways, because we know that cloud gives customers or whatever users the freedom to spin up and down, to be real adopters of agile instead of waterfall development methodologies, by which I mean instead of 6 or 9 or 12-month cycles that developers are working against, you've got short sprints and you can continuously reevaluate and spin assets up and down when you're in cloud. And that freedom, I think, is what really drives the move to cloud. That being said, no one would do anything if they didn't think it could be secure. And I do hear increasingly that security is a reason to move. And I think that's fair. I think that's an accurate representation to say that it can and should be a driver. But I guess I want to kind of give a nod to the fact that a real motivator for most enterprises is that generative side. It's the business that they're in. So if you're talking to a retailer or a healthcare organization or an oil and gas organization or whatever, the ability to go after their own bottom line, to suit their own customers, and to prioritize their own IT and billing and everything management is really a key benefit of moving to cloud. In terms of the move to automation, so I really think that this is an inherently cloudy thing. So I don't think that it is something that waits for you when you reach some Super Mario Brothers level and you get to eat the coin or whatever. I think you will see benefits on day one in the form, especially, for every, as you mentioned, for every enterprise, it's a little bit of a different journey. But a lot of folks have some on-prem assets, and that's fine. That doesn't take away from the benefits that you get for the stuff that you are moving. And I think that what we see is, some customers are really looking to manage services because that allows them to take advantage of more of a curated experience when they go into the cloud. So these are ones that kind of include some default reckoning on our side, and sort of lead that shared security model. So where Amazon takes care of the security of the cloud, and the customer generally is responsible for security in the cloud. Managed services give you a more high touch model where we are providing some kind of default reckoning in there. And so some customers find that helpful to get into more automation. But you can also just build your own architectures, as custom as you want. And I think the short answer. I hear myself saying that even though I've been talking for a few minutes, but the short answer is that automation is available to you as a benefit from day one. But I think, more sophisticated customers get better at it. And the way that they do that is by being even more conscious and coherent about their strategy around the assets they have. So things like tag-based approaches to their knowing what assets you have and tagging them. You can tag based on compliance regimes. You can tag based on, development teams and who owns what, or cost centers. But that's just one example of a way that sophisticated organizations are really proactive about knowing what they have, and then once you have that architecture in place for tagging, for example, you can take remediative actions that are based on that. So really getting to the point where you leverage that freedom to kind of automate yourself out of a job. Our SOC, our Security Operations Center, is really minimal. It's like a guy with a cell phone. And that is just because we have scripted, we have a personal, I'm referring to companies as people, being a Scalia here. So our internal policy is that you don't close a trouble ticket until you've scripted the remediation. So, that leads to, in small ways, that's one way to kind of create this culture of automation.
That's it's super interesting to hear you talk about kind of automation being available. I guess from day one, but maybe it's maybe not every company wants to do it straight away. And I mean, I believe it's a very cloud principle. I don't think many companies that are still pretty much full on-prem think too much about automation, but I'm excited for them to go on that journey, because it's super interesting when you start going deeper and thinking about how you can grow a company without your security operations team growing with the number of employees. It's just kind of unprecedented leverage that you can get. I'd love to hear you've mentioned this already, security being a very human problem. After all, we are at the Human Layer Security Summit. One of the things that Tessian really cares deeply about is understanding, human error. It's inevitable. We can't train people to be right 100% of the time. And with the kind of unprecedented options that a platform like AWS gives to IT and security professionals, I think one of the common fears that we hear from our customers is we're one configuration away from accidentally making an entire S3 bucket public. I'd love to hear how internally AWS think about human error with configuration. And I can, as a huge AWS fan and customer, there are lots of configuration options, and that's what makes it so powerful. But how does AWS internally think about the fact that people will make mistakes? How do you build that into your product? How do you build that into your own internal kind of monitoring, etc.? Just love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that our approach is to try to make the secure thing to do the easiest thing to do. And that takes work on the engineering side. It takes work on the human level policies side. And it ultimately recognizes that we are human, and we try to put in, fail safes, and also to kind of help customers to understand, the right tool for the right job. So I think that our approach internally is actually very open. We allow developers to really run, but of course, depending on your industry and your risk profile. I think it would make sense for different customers to choose different approaches. That being said, I've seen customers do things like have alarming where assets that are out of compliance, they get alarmed, and in 15 minutes they bring them down. And pretty soon you'll get developers knocking on your security team's door, and that's fine. Then they have a conversation about what security policies are in place and what would make them acceptable. So I think that there's no one answer here either, but the process itself is driven by a mix of technical controls, human layer policies, and then ultimately, figuring out what works in execution, being wise about production and test environments too is one way to ensure that, things shouldn't go into production until you've done a fair amount of testing.
Yeah, perfect. No, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of how you think about it is relatively similar to how we think about it. So it's good to see that there's some overlap there. You mentioned, just to pick up on one of those phrases about, developers knocking on the door. Something we, have been hearing about now for a good number of years. Again, something that we're pretty passionate about as a company is this concept of, shifting security left. You can't view your security team now as the 20, 30, 100 people in the security operations center. Like with AWS and the amazing tooling and the agile, you've already mentioned waterfall to agile and what AWS can do for development teams. How important is it now for your the developers on your team to be viewed as security professionals? How can AWS empower developers to understand, the power that's been wielded with, the AWS platform? And how are you at AWS thinking about that? Is that something you believe in? Is it something you're a proponent of and an advocate for? Just love to hear your thoughts on, shifting security left.
Yeah, definitely. I think, this is something that is near and dear to me personally, where I sometimes ask folks who are developers to take a look at something and just kind of put a security eye on. So it is because I believe that there is nothing that inherently makes a person a security person except the sort of consciousness to look at the world that way. And by the same token, I used to say, walking around, I don't remember what it was like to see the world before I was a security person. Right. And I think but that is actually in my view, a healthy thing for organizations to really embed security into everything they do. At Amazon, we use the phrase security is job zero, which just connotes the idea that you don't get to tack it on after the fact. It is not an afterthought, and it's not a late arrival in a perimeter thing where you bolt it on. But the reality, I think, for developers is also changing. The old perimeter-based model just doesn't work. You need to be building with an awareness of security as you go. And what I've seen at AWS is that developers don't always feel like they are security people, but they often are, that this is, again, just a perception. And to be fair, the security community can be kind of a, snarky place. And so I think a lot of folks avoid it because it can be intimidating and a little bit of a know-it-all kind of culture. But that too is, in my mind, not good enough. If your developers are not understanding, the decision-making or even just the kind of reasoning that went into some of your security decisions, then you need to help them understand. And certainly the way that we are building in cloud is with security as part of the way that you make architectural decisions. So there is no way to, silo that and exempt your developers from needing that kind of awareness.
Yeah, no, and I completely echo your thing about it being a perception challenge. I think when you go to developer meetups and you talk to the developer community, they won't necessarily call themselves, part of security is a main part of their job, but when you actually go into how they think and what they do day to day, of course security is part of their job. It's kind of, on the first release checkbox or planning document is, security considerations. It's just a perception thing. And I think, hopefully over time, companies like Amazon, Tessian can kind of change that perception so that it's something to be proud of. People engage with, they don't try and pretend that they're not doing it and they're not part of the security community. Those worlds are just going to keep merging, I believe. I guess.
I agree. I think,
sorry.
So for anyone who's watching, if you want to talk about security, feel free to also send me a note or, tweet at me. I will just put that out there now. I'm happy to talk to folks who are interested in kind of shifting more to security in their roles. And I also think that this is one of those conversations that folks should proactively engage their executive leadership with and make sure they get buy-in ahead of time. The time to make your executives invest in your security team is not when something has gone wrong. The time is all, is in that early drumbeat kind of conversation where you say, these are the kinds of things that we care about and the kinds of automations we're putting in play and the kinds of, restrictions we're going to set because it's the right thing for our risk profile, and get buy-in from your executives and make escalations part of your culture. So for example, at in our response regime, we have automated escalations. And so senior folks know that they need to answer the phone for security. And that is just an expectation. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. It is just the way that we do business. And I think if you want to ensure that folks are getting the important messages that you need them to get from a security perspective, creating that as a cultural expectation ahead of time is a really important element.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And you should definitely take Merritt up on that offer to answer a couple of tweets if you're interested in security. I think we probably have time for one more topic, and I know it's something that you're particularly interested in, Merritt, and it's around zero trust. It's another thing that we are hearing more and more about over the last couple of years. It's also something our audience is really keen on hearing about. I've seen a number of questions come in about zero trust. Could you just talk a little bit about zero trust? Why does it matter? Why are we hearing about it more and more? Does the kind of changing in remote working and, you've already mentioned like the perimeter is broken, the perimeter is no more. I think remote working has probably, has destroyed the perimeter even more than before. So I'd love to hear just about, your thoughts on zero trust, what it means in a perimeterless world, what it means for remote working, etc. Yeah, just love to hear some thoughts on that.
Sure. So, to my mind, zero trust is, as you mentioned, kind of a hot topic, but this isn't a new concept. I think that the way that I think of it is the benefits that you get from Amazon and the fact that we have, for example, custom hardware, the AWS Nitro system that has a ton of security benefits, the benefits that you get from, everything that we kind of do on the customer side or on our side on behalf of customers. And then there is the zero trust that is like what customers can be doing to enforce that and to use the building blocks of AWS to create an environment that feels zero trust. The common sense part of me says, not every decision should be as laden with security protocols as possible, right? I mean, like not every simple phone interaction needs the same type of security as as classified interactions would, or, so some of this is just a determination of where your crown jewels are and how to, making sure that you have an awareness of what you kind of want to tolerate around the security and accessibility of what you have. But I would say that, the conception with zero trust is just like you mentioned, that you can look at traditional network perimeters, but that's not where the conversation ends. We need to be thinking about the ways that you implement your security controls throughout the process. And, these days that looks like everything as you architecturally make decisions. So the ways that you have your identity and access management set up, and hopefully least privilege enforced all over, and then also the ways that you have configured your assets to be distrustful inherently, let's say. So I think that, like I said, this is not a new concept, but it has taken on new life recently. And I actually think that it makes sense in cloud to take advantage of the fact that you don't have to maintain those bottom layers of the stack. The basic proposition of cloud is that from the concrete floor up through layer 4, the hypervisor, we protect those. And so that in itself, gives you returns on investment, especially if you're a small or medium business. But even the largest folks, we've got Netflix and Airbnb and Pinterest, running fully on AWS. These are folks with a lot of interesting security considerations, and they're doing it in the cloud.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And yeah, I completely agree about, having to have a pragmatic approach. Not everything needs to be, completely slowed down by the most stringent security checklists. It's about understanding, like you said, where the crown jewels are, where's your most sensitive data and assets, and making sure that the right security procedures are based around those things. And let's empower people to go and do their jobs and not burden them and slow them down in areas where it's not so relevant. I think that
Ed, you're not disagreeing with me at all, and
sorry for that.
You're keeping it.
Yeah, it's very I mean, we're very aligned, so we're very security first. So yeah, I think that is all we've got time for, actually. And thank you to all of those who have submitted questions. And for those that we didn't answer, we will be sure to follow up with you individually. I'd love to obviously say a huge thanks for Merritt and spending time with us and sharing her insight today. And thank you to the audience for joining the session. I'll be handing back over now to Kelly, who will take us onto the next session, and we'll be unveiling some incredibly exciting news. So stay put.